Senator Roberts.
President, my question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Gallagher. The Digital ID Bill was passed with the promise that it would not be compulsory per Section 74, Clause 1. And your bill includes a provision that alternative methods of establishing identity must be provided, Section 74, 1A. My electorate office is receiving complaints from the public who are being required to obtain a digital ID in order to, in one instance, get their own medical report as part of a job application. This was a real-world, not an online application, a real-world application. Minister, what options are available to a person who is not offered an alternative method of identity verification as the Act requires? Where can people complain, and what penalties are imposed on an entity who fails to follow your legislation?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Roberts for the question. Well, as you know, Senator Roberts, the digital ID legislation has not come into effect yet. It doesn't come into effect until the 1st of December this year. But the system, essentially we've legislated the existing system, which was unregulated. That's what we've done with that legislation. There is a requirement in the legislation to continue to provide alternate opportunities or ways for people to engage with government for their personal use. Businesses, of course, already engaging with the tax office do use the MyGov ID system, but for your personal use, the law is very clear that there must be alternate ways provided for the community to engage with government. That has been made very clear across government. And I would say if you want to forward me that constituent, I would be issue, even if it's de-identified, I'd be very happy to look at it. But we have been very clear. It is a voluntary system, it is a safe system, it is a secure system, and it's simply a means of verifying yourself in a way that gives you control of your own documentation. So instead of having all your ID photocopied or emailed around the place, that you would be the one verifying your identity and you're able to hold those documents to yourself. It's actually a much safer way of engaging with government than it is through paper-based systems, and I'm very hopeful that more people will take it up once the legislation is in place and the regulator is in place. Of course, once that legislation is enacted, there will be a regulator. The ACCC will perform that role, and so there would be the ability there to make complaints and have those complaints investigated.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister. The entity responsible was the Queensland State Government. Will you either now instruct the Queensland Labor Government to follow the legislation and ensure an alternative option is allowed, or will you do so after the legislation is enacted?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Well, the legislation does enable a national digital ID system or ecosystem. There are private sector digital ID and there are also state government versions. But what it would mean, what the legislation means, is that those state governments can apply for accreditation through the national system, but they may, and we're hopeful that they will do that. In fact, on a meeting on Friday I had with states, they are all certainly indicating that they will be part of that national system. But for a state-based system who has their own processes for engaging on rates and other things, that is a matter for the Queensland Government and would have to be taken up with the Queensland Government.
Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, was the failure to include penalties for not providing alternative verification options a failure of this government, or was the imposition of a mandatory digital ID the plan all along?
Minister Gallagher.
The legislation is very clear. It's a voluntary system. That is, people, for their personal engagement with government, have the right to choose whether they use a digital ID or they use the more traditional way of engaging with government. In terms of penalties, we will be having, and the legislation does set up, the ACCC as the regulator of the system, and that would be the way that complaints and other issues would be assessed. So there is a system in place. I don't have the legislation right in front of me, but we were very clear that putting this in legislation, putting the digital ID ecosystem in legislation, is actually about ensuring that it is safe and that consumers' needs are fundamental are front and centre and are protected through a regulated system. At the moment, I have a digital ID, but it doesn't exist under a regulated system. So the legislation, all that it did was take a lot of what's happening now outside of a regulated system and regulate it.
Thank you, Minister. Senator